everybody, it's Trags, and it's Wednesday, October 31st. Happy Halloween. It's time for episode 269 of Patriots Beat on the CLNS Media Network. Find us at clnsmedia.com and follow us on Twitter at Patriots CLNS. Patriots come off a short week following an ugly, perhaps uninspiring but effective 25-6 win on Monday night in Buffalo. They started 1-2 and they have won 5 straight. Next up this Sunday night at Gillette is a game that has been circled on the calendar since April when the NFL schedules were announced. It's Tom Brady and the Patriots against Aaron Rodgers and the Packers. Brady versus Rodgers for just the second time, as Matt Flynn, many people will recall, nearly upset the Patriots in a Sunday night game at Gillette back in 2010. The Patriots coming out on top 31-27 in that game. That's when the schedule makers thought they were getting Brady Rodgers for the first time. To discuss this much-anticipated matchup is Tom Silverstein, longtime Packers beat writer for the Milwaukee Journal-Sentinel. You can follow him on Twitter at Tom Silverstein, all one word, and you should be following him not just this week, but all year round as he does a tremendous job for the Journal-Sentinel. Tom also hosts the Packers podcast at jsonline.com. Quite an introduction, Tom. Welcome to Pat's Beat.
Yeah, thanks. That's one of the finest introductions I've ever had. Thank you.
You're very welcome. 29 years, is that right?
That's right. Yeah, it's almost 3 decades. I've covered every game that Brett Favre and Aaron Rodgers have played.
That is amazing. Before we get into the X's and O's, the culture, is that something that people up there take for granted, or people who cover the beat like yourselves? Can you ever take that for granted, or do you appreciate just what it is to be covering one of the charter members of the NFL and certainly one of the iconic sports teams in America?
I think what I appreciate is that there's a fairly knowledgeable fan base, and that you can report and talk and analyze football quite a bit, because the actual game part is really important to people here, and they have a fairly advanced knowledge of the game, and so they appreciate really good analysis and in-depth look at the game. And so I think that's probably what I appreciate the most about the culture. The culture has changed a lot. I mean, they went from the Lombardi period when they were nationally renowned to a 20-year period where they were absolutely the joke of the NFL,
right.
Where people used to say players used to say that's where you were sent, to end your career, to coming back and then becoming one of the most successful year-to-year organizations around, and to this period where they had 2 Hall of Fame quarterbacks back-to-back. So it's an interesting history.
So I'm going to ask you point blank: what is the difference between covering a Brett Favre and an Aaron Rodgers?
Good question. They're 2 different styles of quarterbacks, although there are some similarities. Favre was very much high emotion, very consistent in his approach to the game, his emotional approach to the game, his mental approach to the game. Rodgers is more intellectual. Has a more intellectual side to it, a little less down home than Favre was. Favre's enthusiasm for the game was unparalleled, and of course his toughness was too. But Rodgers has been, somewhat of just a pinpoint, really technically good quarterback. And so it's 2 different guys, but they sort of get the same thing done. And it's been interesting, and it will be interesting when Rodgers' career is over to compare where they both stand.
Tom, how do you think they are in fourth quarters, Favre and Rodgers? They both have the reputation, I guess, of being gunslingers, but I mean, I think Favre was more the gunslinger than Rodgers, but Rodgers is somebody who's fearless in the fourth quarter, and that's what made watching, I think, Ty Montgomery, for every Packer fan, watching what he did on Sunday just inexplicably frustrating, right? I mean, he brings the ball out of the end zone when all the Packers needed was to drive down the field by Aaron Rodgers and win the game with a field goal, right?
Yeah, and what was the worst part about it was that the Rams had left them the 2-minute warning.
Right.
And the only way they lose the 2-minute warning is if he returns the kickoff, and then the 2-minute warning is blown right before the possession. So they only had one timeout, but they had the 2-minute warning if he takes the touchback. And so, with 2:05, now there's no guarantee. Rodgers has not been perfect in the fourth quarter. In fact, early in his career, he went a long time before he had a fourth quarter comeback. It was sort of a thing for a while. And then it started, he sort of broke that span where he was unable to rally them to a win. And he's been better since then. Just to get back to what your original point was, Favre was the king of the fourth quarter comeback. I mean, he was absolutely fearless, and some of his fourth quarter comebacks ended up with interceptions. But, if I ever had to lay down some money on who I wanted to be my fourth quarter guy, I guess Brady would be first and Favre would be second, because he was you just knew he was going to do whatever it took to get down there, and he wasn't going to be afraid to try to win the game. So that being said, Rodgers, everything was set up for them to pull off that game. They only needed a field goal, and Crosby had already hit from 53 yards. It was a beautiful day. Mm-hmm. So, it was that was an opportunity that they could end up ruining the rest of the year.
They're now 3-1, correct? That is the record coming into Gillette Stadium. And what makes it, I think, Tom, that much more painful for Packers fans and, for the Packers coaches and players, obviously, is that you follow up a game against the undefeated Los Angeles Rams with a game on Sunday night against the New England Patriots, who, their reputation precedes them, obviously. And that 1-2 punch, I can't imagine a team having a tougher pair of road games this year on the NFL schedule than the Packers having to go out to L.A. and then trek back across the country and play at Gillette, right?
Yeah, no question. And really, it's part of a 5-game stretch and almost impossible 5-game stretch where they play at L.A., then they go back to the East Coast to play the Patriots, then they come back home to play Miami, then they go out west to play Seattle, and then they go to Minnesota the following week. So if ever there was a 5-game stretch that was going to decide your season, that's it. And, I actually wrote a column to this effect that I said they don't have to win the Rams and Patriots games, but they have to be extremely competitive. They have to start to come together. And I actually went back and looked at what happened in that 2010 game when Matt Flynn played at New England. And, that game really propelled them. It sort of showed them that they could compete with the rest of the league, because New England was one of the best teams at that time. And competing with their backup quarterback and nearly winning the game sort of gave them the confidence that they needed to. And then they went on that hot streak and they ended up winning the Super Bowl. So now we find out whether this Rams game is the same thing or whether they can produce this kind of competitive game they did, in 2010 and 2014 when they played New England that year. they went to the NFC Championship game, and they beat New England in what was just one of the best games of the year, as I recall.
20,
really
yes.
Great
26-21, if I recall.
Yeah, and it was just a great back and forth strategic game where, Belichick and McCarthy were going at it, and it was really a good game. So that's why, there's a lot of historical implications here, but it's the Packers have to play well. They don't have to win, but they have to play well.
Speaking with Tom Silverstein of the Milwaukee Journal-Sentinel, has covered the Packers for the last 29 years. He also hosts Packers podcast on jsonline.com. Tom, you go back to your point that you just made a couple of moments ago about the chemistry and can the Packers come together. The Ty Montgomery situation on Sunday has generated something, of great controversy, and that is people questioning and, anonymous teammates questioning his character and whether or not he took that ball out of the end zone in spite or despite being pulled from the game earlier and not being on the field. Clue us in on exactly what was going on and what's gone on the last couple of days in Green Bay.
So, yeah, and part of this, this is something that Mike McCarthy has to address, and he has to, part of Ty Montgomery's frustration was the result of how McCarthy has handled some of these things. So they have a 3 running back rotation. And it's been clear to everybody but McCarthy that Aaron Jones is their best running back. And of course he proved it again Sunday with a 33-yard touchdown run, and he averages over 8 yards a carry. And he's averaging, I have to go back and look because I haven't looked at the latest stats, but he's averaging around 5 yards, more than 5 yards per carry. He's an explosive runner. His pass protection is a problem, which in Green Bay you have to be able to pass protect as a running back. But he's so explosive that you got to get the ball in his hand 15 times a game, and he's been averaging about 8 times a game. And so Montgomery and Jamal Williams have been the other 2 backs. And what happened was, they had a play for Montgomery late in the game. For some reason, McCarthy put him in there, and they threw to him, and the play was screwed up, and it was incomplete, and McCarthy brought Aaron Jones in. And Montgomery, who had only had a few snaps during the game, was upset for being pulled so quickly. And I guess he threw his helmet. None of these guys saw it. I don't know if Mike Silver was down on the sideline or
right.
what, but it was apparently he threw his helmet down. And then on the kickoff, he was told, take a knee, unless it's in play, of course, then you have to return it. But if it's anywhere in the end zone, take a knee. And he claimed yesterday that it was so close that he didn't know whether he was in the end zone or not. He was afraid that he was going to, take a step and be outside of the end zone. So that was his excuse. Really, then that's a coaching issue. If you don't tell him to look down at your feet and see where you're at, and if you're in the end zone, take a knee, then I don't know what was going on. So anyway, that's where a lot of this started. There was Mike Silver was able to get a couple guys to rip Montgomery anonymously, and then on Monday, one of the team's leaders, Tramon Williams, kind of ripped the players who ripped Montgomery, and Montgomery said that he had gotten threats and felt like he could not trust his teammates anymore. And so it's kind of a mess there. That
sounds chaotic, Tom. Yeah.
Yeah, it is. Now, discord is not always a bad thing. Sometimes discord sort of brings the truth, and it causes people to look at what's going on and be honest about stuff, but only if you address it. If you don't address it and you just let it fester, then it's going to tear the team apart. And that's what we're going to find out in the coming weeks, is whether they can come together over this or whether they just start splintering. And, some really bad losses, and you know what direction they're going to go.
Right. How has Aaron Rodgers' patience stood up with all of the miscues around him? Not just Ty Montgomery, but, I mean, there have been people who have been very critical of Mike McCarthy and, his coaching and his game calling and what have you. And his offensive line has been at times, and correct me if I'm wrong, but at times has just let him down. I mean, I remember the opening night against the Bears, at Sunday night game, where Rodgers got hurt his knee, and he had that miraculous, heroic comeback in the second half when he came off the stretcher and started the second half and led them to that come-from-behind win. But how is Aaron Rodgers' patience holding up?
Well, and I might be in sort of the minority here, but I also feel like I've been around the game enough to see how this stuff goes. And
certainly,
McCarthy does have some culpability in the offense not performing. I've been on him all year about not giving the ball to Aaron Jones. It's just a joke that they haven't given it to him. Now, all of that, Rodgers is a temperamental person, and he has a way of doing backhanded criticisms of McCarthy and when he's unhappy, and instead of just being blunt and honest about it, he has a way of kind of backdooring these criticisms. And he is not completely innocent of some of the problems they've had on offense. I mean, he's held on to the ball too long. He's trying to make too many big plays. He's trying to take the offense in his own hands. And the truth of the matter is, since they corrected some things in that Bears game, and actually brought in a veteran at right guard, Byron Bell, to replace Justin McCray, their offensive line has been very good, and he's had a lot of time. It's just, they had some injuries at wide receiver, and they're playing with some really promising rookies there. But Rodgers has not been as good as normal, and part of it might be his knee, and part of it is he's 34 years old, and he's getting older, and there's some things he can't do as well as he once did. He's had 2 broken collarbones. He's got this knee injury. He's had a calf injury. He had a broken foot when he was a rookie. So, his body's taken some hits. And while he's really, obviously, very, very talented and still one of the best quarterbacks in the NFL, he has to accept some of the blame for what's gone on as well. And for some reason, he and McCarthy just, I don't know if it's because they've been together so long, and you can probably go through instances when Belichick and Brady have not seen eye to eye as well.
Most definitely.
It's a matter of, when do you come together and do what's best for the whole team and put behind all your dissatisfaction. So that's what has to happen for them. And Rodgers has to play better, and McCarthy has to coach better. But it's not, to me, the national narrative has been that, Rodgers is being wasted. And, you could say that, but they've been in NFC Championship games, since in 14 and 11, and or not 11, but they've been close, and I think 14 and 16. So they've been right there, and they just haven't been able to get over the hump. And both those guys have to take some responsibility for it.
Well, see, and I think, one of the big differences here in New England, Tom, speaking with Tom Silverstein, covering the Packers for the Milwaukee Journal Sentinel, one of the big differences is Brady has Josh McDaniels, the offensive coordinator here, and they are best buds. And neither one of them deny it. I mean, they both say, they admire the heck out of each other, and they're friends on and off the field. And, that buffer, allows, I think, Brady to kind of handle Belichick, tolerate sometimes when Belichick comes down on Tom hard, because he does. I don't know if there is anything like that for Aaron Rodgers in Green Bay, is there?
No, McCarthy never comes down on Rodgers. I mean, that might be part of the problem, is that, Rodgers has built a lot of capital here. He's now the highest paid player in the NFL.
Right.
And he's quite aware of that. And he has a tremendous amount of leverage in the offense. I mean, they do so much RPO stuff, and he calls all the plays in the 2-minute, and he's got all kinds of audible opportunities, and he has a say in the game plan each week. So, he's not always thrilled with the offense and the way that it's going, but McCarthy has success as a quarterback guy, and I don't know if it's just that they've been together for so long, but they need to. Rodgers needs to figure out, okay, am I on board with exactly what we're doing, or am I going to keep fighting it? And, at some point, I'm sure Brady is the same way, where at some point you come to a middle ground and then you go and you win a Super Bowl. So I think that's kind of where they're at. And the more success they have, if they play better this week than they did last week, then some of these things will start to fade away.
One more question about Aaron Rodgers, and that is, what would beating Tom Brady on the road at Gillette Stadium mean to him? I get that it's only a regular season game and it's an interconference game, obviously, but we mentioned quite a while back that the Packers are looking for that kind of win to kind of galvanize their locker room, their season, kind of get them going in the right direction. But personally, would it mean a lot for Aaron Rodgers to beat Brady on the road?
Yeah, it would. There's no question about it. He's one of these guys who uses anything for motivation, any kind of a slight. He loves to be slighted so that he can use that as motivation. And, I think it really hurt him to lose to Jared Goff, or at least not get the chance to beat Jared Goff. I mean, a guy from his own college, a guy who the next up-and-coming thing, but also has idolized Rodgers. So I'm sure that bothered him a lot. I think the competitive end of him, and I think this is what makes both him and Brady so great. I'll never forget that 14 game in Green Bay when I think Rodgers threw a late touchdown that pretty much sealed the game, or maybe it was a first down that sealed the game. And I remember the cameras went to Brady, and he just cursed up a storm. I mean, you could tell what he was saying. I can't repeat it here, but the competitiveness of Brady was so evident there, and Rodgers is the same way. And it's like, I would love to see the two play one-on-one basketball. I think that would be blast to see how many elbows were thrown and just the competitiveness of them both. And so I think, I think this is a marquee game for Rodgers.
Want to move on to the defense. And, with all of the talk about Aaron Rodgers, what does Clay Matthews think of the way this team is playing defense?
Well, I guess he liked the energy they played with on Sunday, but he's had a poor year to start. He played much better on Sunday. I don't know if it was being back in California or the Coliseum, where he played his college football,
right,
or what. But he was he was a beast on Sunday. He was very, very instrumental in slowing down Gurley, and had a hit and a sack and played his best game of the year. I also think it tended to be the fact that it was coming off a bye. You know, his body's taken a lot of punishment over the years, and I think having a week off helped him a lot. So we'll see where he's at this week. But, you know, they played much, much better. I think really, if you want to know what changed things more than anything, it was them getting their first-round pick, Jair Alexander, back. He was it was one of the best rookie performances I've seen in a long time by a corner. You know, he had 5 pass breakups. He took on Brandon Cooks one-on-one the whole game, and pretty much shut him down. I mean, he gave up a couple of completions, but he played physical. He's a real emotional player, and I think it allowed Pettin to do all kinds of stuff because he could play man coverage behind it and not worry about getting beat. And so I'm really interested to see how they match up with New England's receivers. Back in 2010, I remember they got really aggressive with the receivers. They put Charles Woodson on Welker, and then they had him just try to beat up Welker inside. And I'm very interested to see how that goes, what Pettin does with them. And, of course, he has a long history with the Patriots, too.
Correct. And I was going to ask, he also has a long history trying to defend Rob Gronkowski, who, by the way, hasn't scored a touchdown since week number 1. Does that blow you away?
It does, except that I've watched some of those games where he's got 3 guys on him all the time. I'm amazed at how much attention he draws. And, you know, I mean, it probably explains why they're winning 5 straight, too, is they, you know, he may not have the numbers, but, boy, he's got to be taking tons of attention away from everybody else. He was I remember he was a tough cover. I mean, he's always been a tough cover, but in that 14 game, they couldn't stop him. And in the 10 game, both him and Hernandez killed him. So, you know, he may not have scored, and that does kind of blow me away, but, man, you just know that he's just a time bomb waiting to happen, and you better figure out a way to cover him. And
I'm going to ask you one more question. Who are they going to put on James White? Because I'll tell you this right now, Tom, you know, having covered this team, I haven't seen many more dynamic backs for the Patriots than the kind of season James White is putting together.
Yeah, and you know, we're all familiar with them here from
Wisconsin.
He played at Wisconsin,
right.
And nobody saw his career going in the direction that it has. I mean, he was a good back at Wisconsin, but he wasn't the back he's been in New England. They found a great role for him. That's a good question, and I even wondered whether they might find a way to get Alexander covering him a little bit out of the backfield. But you know, that's kind of hard to do. They do play a dime defense just a lot, and so they have a safety, Jermaine Whitehead, who's sort of a half safety, half corner, and I could see him drawing White, but he's nowhere near as quick as White, and that's going to be a huge key in the game.
Well, if they play a lot of dime, I would assume the Patriots would attack that with a somewhat revitalized running attack, though Sony Michel has been dinged up and will probably, I mean, he's a 50-50 call for Sunday night, but Kenjon Barner, look out for him. He is somebody, a running back who has flown under the radar, was on the practice squad earlier in the year, but they really, really like him. Powerful runner.
Yeah, and the Packers are thin at defensive line, and their guys have to play a lot of snaps, and they wore down in the Rams game. And, you know, if they're getting run on Sunday night, yeah, that could be a problem.
Well, Tom, too bad we didn't get together on Sunday. We were about 6 miles apart. You were, as everybody knows, covering the Packers and the Rams game, and I was 6 miles to the northeast at Dodger Stadium watching the Red Sox wrap up the World Series on Sunday. It was quite the day in L.A., and I just want to thank you very much for taking time out to join us.
Oh, it was a pleasure. Anytime. And, I really enjoyed our talk. It was great.
That is Tom Silverstein of the Milwaukee Journal Sentinel. Not only does he do a tremendous job covering the Packers and has for 29 years, almost 3 decades now, actually 3 decades, but he also hosts the Packers podcast. You can catch that at jsonline.com. Again, Packers podcast at jsonline.com for the lowdown on everything Green Bay Packers. You can also follow him on Twitter, by the way, Tom Silverstein, all one word, and that's Silverstein. For producer Mike Alonji, our executive producer Larry H. Russell, and the founder of the network, Nick Gelso, this is Mike Petralia, and this has been the Patriots Beat podcast, powered by CLNS Media.